What's going on, everybody? And so I've been thinking about doing this video for a while, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this out so everybody else can learn from it. So today we're going to talk about the top 5 things that I have learned over my 3 years of owning and operating a worm farm. So during that time, I've made pretty much every mistake you could think of, right? I've overwatered, underfed, too hot, too dry, whatever. So just going to go ahead and dive into it. So first thing that I want to talk about is how to start, right? So just starting cheap. It's really the best way to, really dive into the hobby. You can see here I've got 2 of my bins open. This is just some, plastic totes that I got from Lowe's, I believe. And here is a cooler that I bought from somebody off of, Marketplace. Pretty cheap, pretty easy to get into. And then back here, I've got another box that I've built. Just picked up the supplies from Home Depot, saved me a lot of money. It's a continuous flow through, so just put everything in at the top and just harvest everything down at the bottom. Something like that could easily cost 5-6 grand. I built that for less than 100. So pretty easy to start, like I said, with the bins. Just make sure it's cheap, something that you could easily manage. And talk about managing, also starting out with a small amount of worms, right? So you can get, bulk worms, whatever have you, 500, whatever. But being able to grow your own population is super huge, right? So if you can buy a few, expect some of them maybe not to make it. But if you can get the right conditions, so that way all your worms can start breeding effectively and, just escalate your population growth from there. And then you can start, moving worms in other bins. That's what I do. So I've got this one over here is closed up, but I've got 2 right here. One is actually behind this, and then I've got another one back there, and then right under this box right here. So just exponentially growing your worm population will save you again in the long run. You can also go ahead and buy 2,000 whatever have you worms from one of the other sellers, Uncle Jim or somebody else, and do that. I've done it as well too, and then I've lost all those worms, and then I had to restart over. But again, start with a small population. Save yourself the hassle and the money. So next, let's talk about like some of the bin setups that you could have, right? So normally people are looking to either produce compost or worm casting or just to breed, right? So this cooler right here I found works really good for breeding because it holds moisture and it keeps a nice cool temperature. So I have a couple coolers that are set up for breeding purposes, and then this guy over here I'll use to go ahead and take the castings out of. Same thing with this box right here with the continuous flow. Let me real quick get this guy. He's trying to escape. You're not going nowhere, homie. Get back in there. So yeah, just knowing what you want your bins to do. What is the purpose of that bin? And that's going to help you with moisture control and other things like that, right? So getting into the third thing, controlling the moisture. So for breeder bins, you normally want to keep them a little bit more moist. Moist, nice, warm, medium temperatures. That's what the worms like, and that's really going to produce the breeding a lot there. Versus if you're doing something strictly for castings, right? A continuous flow with open top works really nice because it's going to keep the moisture down in that bin, right? And then whenever you're going through and drying off those castings, it'll work really well. And just kind of speed up that process for you there. So let's talk about like what happens if you have a bin that is too wet, right? None of my bins are at that right now, but I've definitely had some bins go anaerobic on me. But too wet, what does that look like? I found that if you have standing water in the bin, it is too wet and your worms are probably going to drown. I'll actually tell you a quick story. So with this bin back here, I set 2 watermelons. I cut it in half and then each half in there, and then left for a couple weeks, and then came back and it was completely flooded and all the worms had died in there. Horrible story. but too wet, right? Again, standing water in there. Your worms are not going to like that. It can be muddy, that's fine, but you also have to pay attention because those muddy conditions can lead to the bin going anaerobic. And, you know, of course, if you're trying to get castings out of that, that's not going to be too good. But then too dry, what is that? All right, so I've got some sample castings here. I'll show you what too dry looks like. So notice how you've got this real light color, super crumbly, right? This right here, you can probably go ahead and start sifting it for castings, right? But it's super compacted, right? It's a little bit looser because I've, you know, kind of dug around in there a little bit. But this is going to be too dry, right? And then getting into where you're seeing, grab this right here. Hopefully you can see the little color differences on some of these clumps in here. That's going to be too dry, right? So don't do that. Of course, worms need moisture to breathe. So if your bins are too dry, go ahead and add a little mist of water to them. You know, keep your worms nice and happy in there. So moving on, we're going to go ahead and to talk about our bedding types. So you see I've got leaves in this one and here. Actually, all my bins have leaves in them right now. Leaves work really nice, right? You think about nature, leaves just kind of fall and make a nice bedding for the worms to live in naturally, right? See, you know, they're under there, nice and happy, moving around. And the leaves will also break down too. What I also use is shredded cardboard. So you can see right here, I'll just shred it up and put it in a bag. And if I need to, I can put it in the bins. But what I really use the cardboard for is bedding in the compost that I make to feed to my worms. What I used to do in some of my later videos, you go back and check those out. I would just take the cardboard and lay like the full strip across. It works, but it's just a little bit slow on breaking down and actually, you know, turning into worm castings. So just shred it. It works 10 times better. And if you're going to use cardboard, I definitely recommend composting it, but it'll also work if you just throw it straight into the bins. All right, so we talked about moisture control, bedding. Let's go ahead and get into the importance of worm chow. All right, so you can feed, you know, scraps directly to your worms in your bins. It works. It's going to take a little bit longer to break down. But worm chow, definitely recommend it. All right, so some of the things that I make in my own worm chow. So I have some chicken feed, Asmarite, and every once in a while I'll add in some eggshells for a little bit of grit. All right, notice how I have this finely grounded up into a nice powder. You don't want to put full shells in there. What I'll use to mix all that up is this. Just crack that open, and I've already got some worm chow in there ready to go. And I'll also do the eggshells in there if I want to do those separately. But yeah, ground it up. Worms will go ahead and process it super quick. But yeah, with the worm chow, it changes the game so much because your worms are going to get more of the nutrients that they need. So like the proteins, all the eggshells provide the calcium, all the things that your worms need to be nice, fat, and healthy. Right? You see some of these guys here looking good. Just reaching here, digging around in here earlier, had some really nice happy worms in here. A nice little handful. All right. So yeah, I fed these guys a little bit of worm chow yesterday, and they've pretty much already gone through it. You can see some of the little flakes in there left, but yeah, they get through it pretty quickly. But again, yeah, definitely recommend a worm chow. If you don't want to make your own, you can get one from, you know, one of the providers. I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of their videos and information from. So yeah, like I said, we talked about 5 different things that are going to help improve your worm productions. I'm gonna go ahead and give you a bonus. One that I learned and it's really changed the game for me is pre-compost. All right, so if you're going to use any type of raw materials, banana shells, your kitchen scraps, whatever may have you, pre-compost them, pre-compost them, pre-compost them. It's going to speed up your worms as they process through all that stuff. It'll prevent the extra moisture that goes into the bin, right? So we talked about my whole watermelon experience. If I would have just, put them straight into the compost, it would have took out all that moisture, and I could have just thrown them in into the compost and then thrown them into my bin from there, and then it definitely wouldn't have had that experience. But pre-compost them, and what I actually do a lot is I'll put my eggshells into the compost and then just let those, break down naturally. And it's nice because you don't have to let, the compost run through like a full compost cycle. So I'll normally 4 weeks, and then, it'll break down enough and the worms to go ahead and finish it off from there. And then again, they get through it a lot faster. It's probably like a quarter of the time that it would take them to get through it versus just going through, like a raw banana peel or something like that. And then it also lets you mix your bedding and your feed material, right? So again, with those raw materials that you want to add to your compost, add in, your cardboard. That cardboard is going to break down a lot faster versus, if you just give it straight to your worms from there. So again, pre-composting, 100% recommend. But yeah, so I hope everybody has learned something from this. Thanks for sticking around. If you got any questions, please feel free to reach out in a comment, like and subscribe. Let me know if there's something else that you guys want to see. Take it easy.